The episode opens with a couple fighting in a car. The man seems terrified of the woman, telling her not to touch him, but eventually he loses control of the vehicle and they have an accident, causing the car to explode in flames. Surprisingly, the woman came out of the fire, avoiding any injuries. The opening narration follows. When we look in a mirror, we see a reflection of ourselves. But how much more important than this is the reflection we see in the eyes of another, especially in the eyes of one we hold to be more beautiful than ourselves. Dorky accountant Norman Glass is chatting with his coworker, Roy, about a hot blonde client whose husband just recently died, and they'd only been married for a year. Shortly after, the woman is shown to Norman's office, and before he gets there, she notices his dead wife's picture on the desk and morphs into a brunette, more of his preferred type of a woman. As Norman walks into the office, he's stunned by her beauty, and she introduces herself as Addie. Soon after, the two fall in love and get married, now celebrating their first anniversary. They're not the only ones celebrating an anniversary though. Norman's best friend, Dennis, who also has a beautiful wife named Barbara, whom he married a year prior. Later that night, at 3:04, Norman awakens to see his wife typing away downstairs. He sneaks up behind her and kisses her neck, but is surprised because she tastes like something dead. Addie quickly gets up and runs away upstairs crying. When Norman goes to check up on her, he finds her showering, roughly scrubbing down. Moments later, Norman sees a monster-like creature of his wife's reflection in the mirror. But when he wipes it with a towel, it goes back to Addie's everyday look. Norman apologizes for what he said to Addie, but she brushes it off as not a big deal. In the morning, Norman kisses her before he leaves and is confused on his way out because this time he doesn't feel a bad taste. He goes to his doctor, Dr. Phillips, to get himself checked out, and he explains everything to him. That when he kissed her last night, she tasted terrible, and this morning, he couldn't taste her at all. But Dr. Phillips dismisses his concerns and tells him to relax. Later, Norman swings by his friend Dennis's place, only to discover that he had left his wife Barbara out of the blue. Norman is confused about how Dennis would just up and leave her because the couple had been so happy together. Barbara says that he had just went crazy and said horrible things and that she had never seen him like that. Norman accidentally cuts himself on a broken light bulb while attempting to turn it on, and Barbara says that they're all broken. Norman assures her that Dennis will come back before leaving. Shortly after, Addie steps out of Barbara's house, and Barbara states it's Addie's turn next. That night, Norman discusses Dennis's situation with Addie. He tells her that Dennis didn't even think that he deserved her, so why would he leave Barbara? He then assures Addie that he'd never run out on her like that. Afterward, Norman suggests taking the next step, having a baby. She just says they should get through dinner first, then maybe they'll practice. While Addie is preparing dinner, Norman leans in to kiss her, but again is surprised by that terrible smell and thinks the smell is coming from the garage and takes it out. The next day, Norman is at work and asks Roy about how much of a womanizer he is if he ever starts to find things about a woman that he finds unattractive. Roy is confused and asks if he meant a bad haircut or too much makeup, but Norman answers, saying that he doesn't mean physically precisely, but more like taste and smell. He said he noticed a terrible smell near his wife, and suddenly, the horrible smell disappears. Moments later, Norman gets a call from Dennis, who asks for his help, saying, "It's after me." Meanwhile, Barbara visits Addie, and after making sure Norman isn't there, begins morphing into different types of beautiful women to find her next target. But Addie seems troubled about losing Norman when Barbara tells her that she will have to start thinking about it. Barbara reminds her that it's only a matter of time before he starts to sense the truth and discover her true identity. I'm unsure if I feel bad for Norman or Barbara, but feel free to subscribe to the channel. Sometime later, Norman meets Dennis in a city park. Dennis says he needs help and can't escape from her, saying she can read my mind. Paranoid Dennis claims that Barbara is not what she seems. When Norman asks him where he's been the past 3 days, Dennis replies by saying he's been on the streets, stating that she hates kids. He says she's too perfect and witnesses the opposite of ideal beauty. Norman seems to think he's being delusional until Dennis mentions how she tastes and smells. Now that's something Norman seems to recognize. In the meantime, a strange woman approaches Dennis, who he claims to be Barbara, and shouts for her to stay away. Norman doesn't recognize her, but Dennis does. After that, he runs into traffic and gets killed. Later, at Dennis's funeral, Norman confronts Barbara and says that Dennis was saying crazy things before he died. Although there's some connection to what Dennis said, Norman still believes that he was on some medication. After that, Barbara says that she's selling the place and moving elsewhere to start a new life. Later that night, Addie assures that what happened to Dennis and Barbara will not happen to them. As they're making out, Norman keeps commenting on her beauty, how she gets more and more beautiful every day and her body is so perfect. Addie turns his attention towards something else by asking him to tell her a story, and soon after, he begins feeling her alien body and pulls away, disgusted, leaving his wife to sob again. The following day, he goes to Dr. Phillips, stating that he has lost his sense of touch. He explains that he could feel her at first, but it wasn't her. Norman says her skin was slimy, pointy, and all of a sudden, normal. He feels like his wife is disappearing, as if he is losing her. Dr. Phillips tells him that the symptoms he described resemble what is commonly called hysterical blindness. The doctor says that people report that they can't see, even though there's nothing physically wrong with their eyesight, believing their blindness is real to them. Norman asks why he would suddenly get such a severe problem, but Dr. Phillips states that he's not a psychiatrist and points out that hysterical blindness is associated with some form of guilt or anger. Then Norman says that he was feeling guilty about getting involved with Addie soon after her husband's death, but Dr. Phillips tells him there's no crime in what he did and not to beat himself up about it. Lastly, the doctor states that whatever he's experiencing is all in his head. When Norman gets home at night, everything seems dark until the lights turn on. He discovers Addie has thrown him a surprise party because he's been stressed out lately. He's surprised to see his doctor at the party, and everyone compliments his wife. Soon after, the doorbell rings, and Norman answers it. The woman introduces herself as Angie, but it's Barbara, who's morphed into another woman with a different voice. Angie claims she met Addie at a farmer's market the previous week, and the two instantly became friends. She also compliments his wife, saying he's a lucky man. Sometime later, Norman is outside standing when his co-worker Roy finds him and asks him to return inside. When Roy says his wife is trying to do something nice for him, Norman answers that they never have people over except Dennis. He wonders why she threw the party tonight, but Roy doesn't see what Norman is trying to say and says that maybe she wanted to cheer him up. Then Norman starts repeating the compliments the invitees gave about his wife, like how beautiful and perfect she is, which he believes she might have manipulated them to say. Roy then leaves him and gets back inside, assuring the concerned Addie that Norman had a lot to drink and he'll be fine tomorrow. Roy then talks to Addie about how he wishes he had somebody to do all this for him. Even though he doesn't seem like that kind of person given his reputation, Roy says he spent half of his life looking for a life partner. When he leaves the room, Addie sees Norman blankly staring at her. After the party, he admits to the things he's been experiencing about her and thinks what the doctor said about it just being a psychological issue is an understatement. Addie then tells him whatever it is, they can work it out. Norman apologizes again for his terrible thoughts about her, and Addie suggests they take a vacation. After that, she goes to the kitchen to make him a sandwich. At that moment, Norman begins to hear the slimy creature's footsteps. As he gets closer to her, she realizes what's happening and runs crying upstairs again. All the while, Norman is still hearing those footsteps. He tries telling himself that she didn't sound like that, and it's all in his head. Afterward, Norman goes upstairs to their bedroom to apologize, saying it's not her fault, and he believes he just has a mental illness. She's sitting in the dark, having broken the light bulb, just like in Dennis and Barbara's house. When he asks her why she broke it, she says that she doesn't want him to see her. Addie is finally forced to admit the truth. She and Barbara are aliens whose ship crash-landed on Earth some time ago. If you're happy Barbara finally told the truth, subscribe to the channel. To humans, they are repulsive creatures in their natural form, apparently of aquatic origin. But since they are stranded on Earth with no way to leave, they decided to try to blend in and live out the rest of their lives as human women. Addie says that she can't control what he sees anymore, stating that it always breaks down after a year of being so close to one person. His mind, like others, will become immune to her control. She reveals that when he tasted her, she was afraid to reveal herself to him, so she just blocked out his senses completely. Addie transforms into her natural form, and tries telling him to see past what's on the surface. But as expected, Norman freaks out and gets away from her. So Norman becomes unstable at this knowledge and ultimately suffers a mental breakdown from witnessing Addie's true form. He is taken away by paramedics while saying that she's a monster. Barbara, now known as Angie, is standing next to Addie. The final scene is some time later, and Addie is standing in a park where she stumbles upon a jogger who turns out to be Roy. She changes her appearance into his ideal woman, introducing herself as Stacy and engaging in a flirty conversation. Shortly after, the two start jogging together. The closing narration states, "We all wear masks, illusions of what we want the world to see. But when we hide our true selves from those we love, what price do we pay for the illusion?" If you enjoyed the recap, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching.